The jazz at Riverton restaurant was smooth as silk, and then Noah's crying tore right through it, making a few crystal glasses tremble on the glossy tabletop. Conversations about shares and million-dollar deals stalled for a single beat, then dissolved into discreet side glances, the kind people reserve for a stain that shouldn't exist in the middle of luxury. At the central table, Tristan Caldwell sat bolt upright like a wall, a dark jacket, a cold watch peeking at his wrist, a face that didn't show a single crease, except for his eyes, the eyes that were slowly losing control. Noah, 5 years old, cried until his face turned red, his tiny body curling in on itself on the high chair, his little hands clawing at the air as if grabbing for something invisible. Beside him, Ivy, his twin sister, didn't cry. She just froze, clutching the edge of her father's shirt, eyes wide, scanning the room like a fledgling bird checking whether a predator was coming closer. Tristan tried everything the way a man used to giving orders would try. A stiff, awkward comfort, a firm reminder to be good, a brand new toy his assistant had rushed to buy, even a voice dropped low and hard like steel. But the more he did, the worse Noah sobbed, as if those tears weren't about the restaurant, weren't about being tired, but about a hollow space that had lived too long inside a child's chest. Across from Tristan, a guest in an expensive gray suit set his knife and fork down, struggling to keep polite. Maybe we should move this conversation? He didn't finish the rest, because everyone understood it without words. A man who could control an entire city, but couldn't control his own child, had become the weaker one tonight. Tristan's jaw tightened, his hand hidden under the table as if gripping down a rising fury. He wasn't afraid of losing a deal. He was afraid of the look in those two children, one shattering in front of him, the other going silent. Just as Tristan leaned in to lift Noah, the boy flinched away as if touched by fire. The crying shot higher. Ivy shrank closer, and then a figure appeared at the edge of the table, not loud, not flattering, not asking what the guests needed the way the other staff did. She was a young waitress, white, hair neatly tied back, a clean black apron. But what made people pause wasn't the uniform, it was her eyes. Those eyes didn't skim to judge, they stopped to truly see, as if she'd heard this kind of crying somewhere before, in some other place, in some other life. She didn't touch Noah right away. She simply lowered herself to his level, so his crying didn't have to tilt upward like a plea. "Hey," her voice was small, just enough to slip through every whisper. Noah hitched for a beat. Ivy watched her like she was trying to read a code. The waitress held Noah's gaze, then turned to Tristan, looking straight into the part of him he tried hardest to bury, and she let 5 words fall, light but sharp like a blade landing on glass. "They just need a mom." In that moment, it wasn't Noah who stopped first. It was Tristan. His breath caught, as if someone had yanked a cord inside his chest. Noah still hiccuped with sobs, but his small hands reached out, not toward his powerful father, but toward the stranger in an apron. When she gathered him in, Noah pressed his face into her neck like he'd found a place to survive. Ivy still didn't cry, but for the first time, she loosened her grip on her father's shirt, just a little, as if asking herself whether this might be safe. Tristan watched it like he'd been nailed to his chair. In a restaurant where everything could be bought with money and power, there was one thing he couldn't purchase: peace inside his children. And with only 5 words, that waitress did what Tristan's entire world, his deals, his bodyguards, his orders, had failed to do. In the far corner, a man at the bar bent over his phone and hit send on a photo he'd just taken. The message had only one line: "Weak spot confirmed." If you want to know what Tristan will do when an enemy touches the only weakness he has, and what tragedy that waitress is hiding in her past, then don't take your eyes off this story. If this opening pulled you in, don't forget to hit like to support us. Share it with friends, because someone out there might need a healing story like this. And don't forget to subscribe, so you won't miss the next compelling video. The glass doors of Riverton closed behind them, and the jazz inside was swallowed at once by the cold wind rolling off the lake, the kind of Chicago wind that always knows how to snap you awake from any illusion of luxury. Tristan Caldwell moved quickly toward the VIP exit, but he wasn't walking with the stride of a winner anymore, not like he had on the way in. Noah clung to Megan's neck for one last moment before he finally let her set him down under the warm yellow lights, his eyes still red and wet, still locked on her like he was afraid that if he blinked, Safe would disappear. Ivy didn't cry, but her hand remembered what it had felt like to let go of her father's shirt. So when Tristan tugged his coat back into place, she reached out without thinking and touched the seam where she'd been holding on, as if she needed to be sure he was still here. The man in the expensive gray suit had already stood up, his polite smile and his patience both folded away as neatly as a napkin on the table. He extended his hand and touched Tristan's very quickly, very lightly, the way someone does when he wants to leave a fire and still keep his clothes clean. He said that maybe tonight wasn't convenient, that kids were kids, that he understood, but that it'd be best to move their conversation to next week when everything was more stable, and the softer the words sounded, the sharper the blade became, because everyone understood what more stable really meant. Tristan had just exposed a weakness to people who only looked at the world as opportunity. Tristan nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just tightened his jaw, let his eyes pass over the table that was now half empty, then let them slide toward the bar, where pale blue light washed over faces pretending not to look. If he'd been someone else, he might have exploded. But Tristan had lived long enough in the dark to know anger only mattered when it served a purpose. He turned to Bennett, the older man who followed behind like a shadow with a heartbeat, and with a single glance, Bennett understood. I saw a camera pointed at your table from the corner near the bar. Not one of the restaurants, Bennett said under his breath, dry and steady, and someone stood up and left the moment you walked out. I don't like the way he looked. Tristan didn't ask for more. He placed Noah into the child seat in the car with a precision that felt like locking a rare treasure inside a safe. Noah hiccuped softly, no longer crying, but his eyes kept searching the empty air as if Megan's outline was still there. Ivy climbed into the seat beside him on her own, the seatbelt clicking as she pulled it across. And she did it slowly, not because she was clumsy, but because each click sounded like a vow, that the door was locked, that no one was allowed to come close. As Bennett finished closing the car door, Tristan's phone vibrated. The screen lit up cold with a message from an unknown number. No name attached, just one short line. Tonight you forgot something. Tristan didn't reply. He stared through the windshield, but in his eyes the streets weren't streets anymore. They were a map of exits and dead ends. A second message arrived right away, as if the sender was standing beside him, counting his breaths. This time it wasn't only text. It was a photo, taken from far away. And it was clear. Noah and Ivy, right outside the school gate, in the noon sunlight. Noah was bent over tying his shoelace, and Ivy stood next to him, her eyes angled toward the lens as if she'd felt the stare. The photo had a red circle drawn around two tiny heads. Beneath it was one line. Every city has laws. Your kids are the key. For a moment, Tristan couldn't hear the engine anymore. He heard his own voice in the restaurant, that low steel voice that had been helpless against a child's crying. He heard Megan's 5 words like a clean cut. They just need a mom. And in the same instant, he understood the person who sent the photo understood it too. Bennett looked at the screen from the passenger seat, his eye tightening at the corner. This wasn't taken by accident, he said. Whoever took it knows the pickup schedule, knows recess, knows where to stand so the school cameras don't catch him. Tristan set the phone down, his hands closing around the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. There's a leak, he said, his voice low. Not outside, inside. Bennett nodded, not needing the rest spelled out. I'll lock down the entire schedule. Change people, change routes, change times. I also want to review the list of who knows the children's school, who has access to the system, who's allowed to stand near the gate. Tristan didn't answer right away. He looked at Noah in the rearview mirror. The boy had slipped into sleep from exhaustion, lashes still damp. Ivy wasn't sleeping. She stared straight back at her father through the mirror, her gaze too calm for a child, as if Ivy had known for a long time that her father's world was never truly safe, only controlled. Tristan swallowed hard. He'd built an empire by making other people afraid, but when fear came back around and aimed itself at the 2 small lives behind him, he finally understood what it felt like to be powerless. At the same time, back inside the restaurant, Megan wiped her hands one last time, untied her apron, and hung it on its hook like she was hanging up a temporary piece of her life. Alyssa stopped by to remind her about the schedule board, said she'd handled the situation well tonight, but there was a tightness in Alyssa's eyes, as if the manager could feel that something had been stirred awake. Megan nodded and tried to smile, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. When she stepped out through the employee's back exit, night had fully settled, and the cold touched her skin like a warning. She pulled her thin coat closer and walked fast toward the train stop, telling herself it had only been a strange night, that she couldn't get tangled in that man's world, and that she especially couldn't let Noah's eyes pull her back. But on the sidewalk, footsteps behind her suddenly blended into her rhythm, a little slower, then a little faster, like someone was playing at imitation. Megan turned down a side street, and the footsteps turned too. She stopped in front of a closed shop, pretended to search for keys in her pocket, and looked into the dim reflection of the glass. A figure stood a few meters away, wearing a cap, collar lifted to hide half his face, hands in his pockets, as if he was waiting for someone. When Megan spun around, the figure turned and walked off at once, not running, not rushing, calm in a way that felt terrifying. A cold line ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the wind. Megan clutched her bag tight, her heart pounding like the past knocking at a door. She didn't know who was following her, but she knew this feeling, the feeling of being watched, the feeling of being chosen as a target. And when the cheap phone in her pocket vibrated with a new message that showed no name, Megan froze and didn't dare open it yet, because part of her was afraid that from this moment on, her life wouldn't belong to her anymore. Megan stood frozen on the sidewalk for one more beat, the phone vibrating in her coat pocket like a trapped insect. And then she forced herself to move again, walking faster, not looking back, but with every sense pulled tight like a string on a violin, the back of her shirt going cold with sweat even though the wind hadn't strengthened. Only when she saw the name sign for her worn old boarding house, the paint peeling like flayed skin, did she manage to let out a little breath. And even that breath tasted more like disappointment than relief. The metal stairs squealed under her feet. The hallway was narrow and dim, and the smell of frying oil from someone's apartment mixed with the sting of cheap bleach. Megan opened her door and flipped on the light, and the weak yellow glow exposed a room so small that turning around meant brushing against furniture. On the table sat a stack of envelopes and papers she'd been refusing to look at for days, as if ignoring them could make them disappear. But tonight, after the figure in the cap and the nameless message, she couldn't hide anymore. She pulled the phone out, and the screen showed a line so bare it felt brutal. "Don't think you've escaped. No signature. No explanation." Megan swallowed hard and set the phone down the way you'd set down a knife. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't allow herself to scream. People don't scream in places like this. They just keep living, the way they've kept living after worse days than this. She opened the first envelope. An electric bill, marked in red. A medical bill from the night she'd fainted on a graveyard shift because she hadn't eaten. A credit card past due notice. The number printed there so absurd it almost made her want to laugh, but she didn't. She only set it down, then pulled out the last sheet of paper, the one that tightened her throat even before she read the words. A notice from the supervised visitation center. Cold type. Next month's visit had been canceled because she was not meeting requirements. Megan stared at the date written in emotionless numbers and blinked hard. She'd waited a full month just to see her child for 2 hours, in a park, under the eyes of a monitor sitting a few steps away like she was guarding a criminal. Those 2 hours were the only thing that kept Megan from falling straight into a pit, the only thing that made her comb her hair, put on clean clothes, and force cheerful sentences so her child wouldn't see her breaking. And now they'd cut it off with a single page. Megan dropped to the floor, back against the bed, arms wrapped tight around her knees, and memory yanked her 3 years back as if someone had ripped a rug out from under her feet. A cold courtroom. A man in a suit that cost 10 times more than anything she owned. A lawyer speaking smoothly, pouring words like water. Files stacked neatly. Testimony presented as if it were obvious truth. Megan had stood there, a thin white girl with hands rough from dishwater and carrying trays. No money for a decent attorney, only an overworked legal aid helper telling her to stay calm, to trust justice. But justice in that room smelled like new paper and expensive cologne, and Megan smelled like cheap soap and night shifts. They said she wasn't stable. They said she didn't have a home big enough. They said the child would be better somewhere safe. Megan remembered how she'd wanted to shout that she was the mother, that she could be poor and still not be dangerous, that her little girl had once slept on her chest when she was still newborn red, that her crying had once been a second heartbeat inside Megan's ribs. But she couldn't beat words that came stamped and signed. She lost her child not because she didn't love her, but because she didn't have enough strength to fight a machine. After that, she lived on the few scraps of visitation, on old photos, on the scent of her child's hair still caught in a tiny shirt she couldn't bring herself to throw away. Megan wiped at her tears and didn't let them fall loud. She stood, pulled open the bottom drawer of the dresser. Inside was an old shoebox tied shut like a secret. She opened it. Inside lay a pair of tiny socks gone pale with time, a star-shaped hair clip, and a small stuffed rabbit with a worn ear. Megan touched the rabbit, her fingers pausing on the stiff seam across its belly. She knew it wasn't normal, because she was the one who'd hidden it there on a desperate night, when an old friend had whispered that if she wanted her child back, she needed to keep anything that could prove they'd lied. Carefully, Megan picked at the seam with her fingernail and pulled out a tiny memory card wrapped in a plastic bag. Her heart slammed. On that card was an audio recording she'd managed to keep by accident. A man's voice talking about handling the file, handling the witnesses, handling the signature. Words scattered but dirty enough to make her sick. She'd never dared to bring it forward, afraid it'd be crushed before she could even breathe, and because she'd always believed a waitress like her couldn't win. But tonight, after the nameless message, after the feeling of being followed, she understood. Someone was digging up her past, and if they'd started, then either she'd be pushed deeper under, or she'd have to learn how to swim up. Megan closed the box, held it tight against her chest, and walked to the small window that looked down on the parking lot. Under the washed-out streetlight, a man stood leaning against a pole, cap pulled low, his face drowned in shadow. Not a neighbor, not someone lost. He stood there like a guard, like he knew exactly which room needed to be watched. Megan held her breath, the curtain trembling lightly in her hand. The man didn't look up, but after a few seconds, he lifted his hand to his ear like he was listening to a phone, then turned his head in the exact direction of her window, even though he couldn't see clearly. Megan backed away, her heart punching her ribs until it hurt. She clenched the shoebox in her hands, feeling like she was holding her past and her future at the same time. Somewhere in this city, Tristan Caldwell was locking down his children's schedule to fight off an invisible predator. And here, in a poor rented room, Megan realized she was being hunted too, and that the brief peace at Riverton had only been a door opening onto a storm she hadn't been ready for. The next morning, Megan had barely slept, only dozing for a few minutes at a time, before jerking awake at the rattle of the water pipes and the feeling that someone was still standing beneath the building, even though when she looked down, the parking lot was empty, as if no shadow had ever been there. She went to work earlier than usual, as if the lights of Riverton and the noise of the kitchen could make her forget the cold lodged in her bones from the night before. But that cold didn't disappear. It followed her into the changing room, clung to her wrist as she tied her apron strings, pressed against the back of her neck as she walked down the corridor toward the dining area. Alyssa Hart spotted her from a distance, stopped beside the storeroom door, and let her eyes sweep over Megan's face like a scanner. "You okay?" Alyssa asked, her voice low, just quiet enough that no one else would hear. Megan meant to say she was fine, the familiar sentence of people who aren't allowed to be weak, but her throat tightened, and all she managed was a thin paper light. "Yeah." Alyssa didn't push. She only nodded and said that if anyone bothered her, Megan needed to tell her right away. It sounded more like a warning than concern. Riverton had plenty of wealthy guests, but not everyone with money was dangerous in the same way. And Megan understood what Alyssa meant. Near the end of the shift, as Megan was clearing a table by the window, a receptionist approached and said someone wanted to meet the manager and was requesting a private area. Alyssa adjusted her blazer and motioned for Megan to follow. Megan walked behind Alyssa through the VIP hall, where thick carpets swallowed their footsteps, where the air smelled like money and felt as clean as secrets wiped away every night. She saw Tristan Caldwell waiting in a small room beside the private liquor counter, with no Noah and Ivy at his side. Bennett stood near him, still like a shaped piece of darkness, eyes never leaving the door. Tristan didn't look at Megan right away. He looked at Alyssa first, the way someone looks at a middle point to keep everything within the rules. "Thank you for making time," Tristan said. He didn't speak loudly, but his voice carried weight that made the small room feel narrower. Alyssa replied politely, but she didn't bow. "Riverton serves guests. We don't serve trouble." Tristan gave a slight nod, as if accepting the principle. "I'm here to do this the right way. I want to talk about her," he said. And only then did he look at Megan. That gaze wasn't the gaze of the man nailed to his chair last night. It was colder, sharper, and yet beneath the cold there was something held tight, something restrained. Megan felt her shoulders tense. She'd seen that look on the faces of men with money and power when they wanted to take what they liked, and she'd learned the most expensive lesson of her life. Don't let yourself become something that gets taken. If this is about the tip from the other night, Megan spoke first. I already said it. I'm not taking it. Tristan didn't react as if insulted. He only placed both hands on the back of a chair, didn't sit, and kept his distance. I'm not here to pay you, he said. I'm here to ask you something. And you have the right to say no. Bennett flicked a quick glance toward Alyssa, as if wanting her to confirm this was voluntary. Alyssa stayed where she was, watchful. Tristan continued, each word falling slow. Last night, in just a few minutes, you did what I haven't been able to do in years. Megan felt a sharp ache in her chest, not pride, but fear. Fear that those minutes would pull her into a new life, a life she couldn't control. I was just doing my job, Megan said, forcing her voice steady. A child was panicking. I helped him calm down. That's all. Tristan studied her, as if weighing whether that answer was defense or truth. I have 2 children, he said, as if repeating something the whole world already knew. But he said it like a confession, and I need them to be okay. Not just in a restaurant. In life. Bennett cleared his throat softly and stepped half a pace forward. Mr. Caldwell isn't asking you to come to the house, Bennett said, his voice not gentle but not harsh either. We won't bring a stranger into the children's environment without a process. There'll be a basic background check through the restaurant manager as a reference. There'll be supervision. There'll be limits on time and on public locations. Megan heard the words background check and her stomach tightened. Her record was mud. Not because she'd committed a crime, but because people had made her look wrong on paper. She remembered the man under her building. Remembered the message, "Don't think you've escaped." Remembered the memory card inside the stuffed rabbit. She couldn't let anyone dig into her life right now. No, Megan said immediately, so firm it startled even her. I'm not getting involved in this. I don't want to be pulled in. Tristan didn't snap. He only stayed silent for a beat, as if respecting the no. Alyssa looked at Megan and didn't interfere, but her eyes asked a question all the same. Are you sure? Slowly, Tristan took out his phone, didn't hand it over, only placed it on the table with the screen facing Megan. It wasn't money. It wasn't a threat. It was a photo of Noah from last night, his face pressed into Megan's neck, eyes closed like someone who'd found shelter when a storm hit. He didn't sleep, Tristan said, his voice lower. Last night he woke up and asked where you were. He didn't ask me. He asked for you. Megan felt her throat clamp tight. She hated the feeling of being pulled by a child, but she couldn't deny Noah's eyes when he'd held her. They weren't demanding. They were pleading. I'm not his mother, Megan said, forcing reason to stay in her voice. And I can't play that role. Tristan dipped his head slightly, as if acknowledging it. I'm not asking you to be their mother, he said. I'm asking for one trial meeting in a public place. Supervised. With Alyssa there if you want. I'll be there. I need to learn how to stay. The word stay fell out strange in the mouth of a man like him. Megan looked at Bennett, then at Alyssa, then back at Tristan. Part of her wanted to run, because she'd lived long enough to know beautiful promises always came with an invoice. But then she looked again at the photo, at Noah's closed eyes, and the memory of her own daughter surged up like floodwater. If back then someone had stayed with her, if someone had seen her the way she'd seen Noah, would she have lost her child? Megan drew a breath, fingers tightening on her apron as if tightening the boundary around herself. One meeting, she said slowly. Only one. In a public place. And if I see any sign of anything, I stop. Bennett nodded at once. We agree. Tristan looked at Megan and didn't smile, but his eyes softened just a little, like ice cracking along a thin line. Megan hated that feeling, hated how one small decision could tilt the trajectory of her life. But as she turned to leave, she heard Tristan's voice behind her, still low, still controlled, but carrying something that sounded real. Thank you. Megan didn't answer. She walked quickly down the hall, heart pounding, her mind wanting to turn back and wanting to run far away at the same time, because she understood that trial meeting wasn't only about helping 2 children settle. It was a door into a world she'd sworn never to step into. And if the man beneath her building last night was still watching, then any door that opened now could just as easily be the entrance to a trap. The trial meeting was set for Sunday afternoon, at a crowded park near the lake, where the noise of children and bicycles was loud enough that no one could quietly tuck danger into an empty space. Megan arrived early and stood beneath the shadow of a bare tree, both hands in the pockets of her thin coat, eyes sweeping the area with the reflex of someone who'd once been driven into a corner by the world. She saw Bennett first, standing a few dozen steps from the entrance, dressed like an ordinary older uncle, but his gaze was anything but ordinary, moving through the crowd like a blade, testing the thickness of the air. Tristan arrived later, without spectacle, without a convoy, just a dark car that stopped in exactly the kind of place you could leave fast if you had to. He stepped out and opened the back door for the children. Noah jumped down first, eyes immediately searching for Megan as if she were the only anchor in a surge. Then he halted, because he remembered his father's rule, that he couldn't run forward without asking. Ivy climbed down more slowly, fist tight on Tristan's coat tie, watching Megan like a riddle that could save you or kill you, and she wouldn't let herself choose at random. Tristan bent to their level, his voice low, trying to soften but still strained, telling them that today was only a trial, that if they didn't feel okay, they should say so, and if they wanted to go home, then they'd go home. Noah nodded hard, as if just hearing Megan's name made everything fine. Ivy didn't nod, but her eyes swept over Bennett, swept over Tristan, then returned to Megan, as if she were mapping every exit. Megan moved closer slowly, not rushing to touch anyone, because she remembered that night at Riverton. What made Noah quiet wasn't the hug, it was being seen first. She lowered herself, hands resting on her knees to keep a safe distance, and spoke gently. "Hello, Noah. Hello, Ivy." Noah held his breath for a beat, and then surged forward, but Megan lifted her hand to stop him, not to reject him, but to teach him something, that he could say he wanted a hug, and then she'd hug him. Noah blinked, lips pressed tight with effort, and then he blurted it out as if afraid it'd be too late. "I want to hug you." Megan nodded and opened her arms. Noah slammed into her and held on so tightly Megan felt her heartbeat change its rhythm. Ivy stayed still, eyes locked on them. Tristan watched it, and his chest tightened. Not jealousy, but something quieter and more painful. The ache of realizing his child had learned to search for safety somewhere else a long time ago. Noah rubbed his face against Megan's coat, then lifted his head, his eyes less red but still wet, like he lived close to the edge of crying, and all it took was one hand letting go for him to fall. Megan didn't ask why. She didn't blame. She only said simple things. "The way you build a bridge, plank by plank, you're worried, aren't you? Your body is shaking because you're scared, but you're in the park, it's daylight. Your dad is here, I'm here, you're safe." Noah breathed fast. Megan put a hand on her own chest and showed him what to do. Then she breathed slowly, counting with her blinks, breathing in like smelling fresh bread, breathing out like blowing a feather into the air. Noah copied her, the exhale trembling at first and then steadier. Megan named his feelings the way you name a wild animal so it stops biting. That's anxiety. That's fear of being left behind. That feeling is big. It's real. But it's not your boss. Noah looked at her like he was learning a new language, then nodded, still gripping her hand, but no longer clawing at the air. Ivy stayed silent, but she stepped forward one small step. So small Tristan noticed it and almost didn't dare breathe. Megan turned toward Ivy and didn't ask if she was okay, because that question often freezes children more. She only said that Ivy was watching, that Ivy wanted to make sure everything was right, didn't she? Ivy's eyes shifted, just a little. Megan offered choices instead of pressure. Ivy could stand beside her dad, or stand beside Megan, or stand alone. Ivy stayed beside her father, but her gaze stayed pinned on Megan, as if hunting for the first wrong sign. They sat on the grass near the playground. Noah pulled Megan toward the swings, wanting her to push him, wanting laughter instead of sobs. Megan did it, but she always kept Tristan within Noah's line of sight, because she understood healing wasn't replacement. It was opening a path so the right person could learn how to step back in. Tristan stood there like an awkward apprentice, hands in his pockets, watching his son laugh while his face stayed tense, as if he feared that if he relaxed, everything would shatter. Megan called to him in a voice without judgment. "Did you want to try pushing Noah?" Tristan stepped forward, hand on the back of the swing, and gave a small push, too small, and Noah turned his head, laughed, and told him, "Harder, Dad." Tristan did, clumsy but real, and for the first time Megan saw the corner of his mouth twitch like it wanted to smile. Ivy didn't play. She sat on the bench, legs swinging, eyes never leaving Megan. When Megan offered Ivy a bottle of water, Ivy didn't take it right away, only looked at the bottle, then at Megan's hand, then suddenly asked in a voice as small as a needle-tapping glass, "Are you a mom?" Tristan went still. Megan went still too, but she didn't show it. She drew a breath and kept her voice steady. She wasn't Ivy's mom. A mom was very important, and Ivy had the right to miss her mom, and the right to be sad that she wasn't here. Ivy stared at her a little longer, as if rummaging through the words to find a crack. Then she tilted her head closer, so lightly it was almost like smelling a memory, and the sentence slipped out before she could stop it. "You smell like Mom. Not perfume. You smell like when Mom hugged me." The air seemed to harden. Tristan stood a few steps away, his hands clasping so tightly they turned white. Megan felt her spine go cold, not from the wind, but because those words touched the deepest place in her chest, the place where her own daughter had once rested, the place where even a scent could drag you under. As soon as Ivy said it, her eyes flashed with panic, as if she realized she'd exposed something dangerous, and she retreated, yanked her hood up, turned her face away, and folded herself into a small, tight shape. Tristan crouched and said Ivy's name, his voice rough, but Ivy didn't answer, only shook her head like someone who'd stepped into a pain zone by mistake. Megan didn't force her. She spoke slowly, like laying a blanket over a wound. "Ivy, you just missed your mom. That's normal. You didn't do anything wrong. You can be quiet. I'll sit here. Dad is here too. You don't have to do it alone." Ivy still faced away, but her hand wasn't clenched into a fist anymore. It loosened a little, as if Megan's words had returned her right to be weak. Tristan looked at Megan, and there was a clear, painful touch in his eyes, like he'd just heard a door in the past swing open. Bennett stood at a distance, scanning, not interfering, but his shoulders were tight, as if he was ready to shield them. The trial meeting ended when the sun dropped low. Noah was tired but happy, clinging to Megan's hand, and Ivy was still quiet but no longer completely frozen, and she was willing to walk a few steps beside Megan before drifting back toward her father again. Tristan helped the children into the car, turned back to say thank you. And this time it wasn't only polite. It sounded like a confession that he needed help. Megan nodded and didn't promise anything else, because she was afraid promises would become rope. And then she turned and headed toward the train stop. She didn't see the man standing on the path behind the trees, but she felt a gaze like needles at the back of her neck. When Megan reached the corner, a man's voice, deep and courteous, sounded right beside her, as if he'd been walking with her all along. "Megan Whitaker. Right. I just wanted to say hello, because it looks like you've just become someone important in Tristan Caldwell's life." Megan spun around, her heart dropping. The man smiled faintly, his eyes not smiling at all, and he said his name like slipping a lock into a keyhole. "Holden Pierce." Holden Pierce said his name as if everyone was supposed to know it, his tone so courteous it made you want to believe him. But his eyes were cold and bright like a needle. Megan took half a step back on instinct, fingers tightening around her bag strap, eyes sweeping the crowded sidewalk and still feeling exposed, because the most dangerous things always choose the busiest places to strike, choose noise to hide the sound of something breaking. "I don't know you," she said, trying to keep her voice even, but her throat was already dry. Holden gave a small smile, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You don't need to know me," he replied. "You only need to know I know you." The words raised gooseflesh on Megan's skin. He shifted sideways, not pressing closer, keeping just enough distance that it could pass for a casual conversation. Two acquaintances running into each other. "You did very well at the park," Holden went on. "The little boy clung to you like a life buoy, and the little girl was interesting. Children always tell the truth. Adults are the ones who hide." Megan tried to swallow. "You've been watching me," she said, and this time it wasn't a question. Holden shrugged as if it were as normal as checking the weather. "I pay attention to what matters," he said, "and you've just become something that matters in Tristan Caldwell's life. That's what makes me say hello." Megan turned to leave, but Holden tilted his head slightly and said one sentence that glued her feet to the concrete. "Megan Whitaker," he called, clear and exact. "You still have that visit with your daughter once a month, don't you?" Blood thundered in Megan's ears. The air around her suddenly felt heavy as lead. She turned back, her face going pale. "Don't," she said, and her voice came out sharper than she meant it to. "You don't get to talk about my child." Holden looked straight at her, calm in a way that felt cruel. "I'm not saying it to hurt you," he said. I'm saying it so you remember you have something to lose. Megan's palms went damp. He knew. Not only her name. He knew the softest place, the one she kept buried under polite service, under night shifts and stacked bills. What do you want? Megan asked, each word pulled from behind her teeth. Holden exhaled lightly, as if discussing a business arrangement. It's very simple, he said. You stay away from Tristan. Stay away from the children. Stay away from that feeling you're having, the feeling of being needed, because if you stay, you'll be crushed. Megan let out a short, hollow laugh with no humor in it. You think I've never been crushed, she said. Holden leaned in a fraction, his voice dropping low enough that only Megan could hear it, low enough to feel like a noose tightening around her throat. I know you lost in court, he said. I know you were labeled unstable, told you didn't qualify, stripped of rights. I know the judge's name, the lawyer's name, and I know you tried to appeal, and it was denied. You think that was bad luck? Megan stood rigid. The memory of the cold courtroom and the crack of the gavel flashed in her mind like lightning. He hadn't just read her file. He sounded like he'd been standing beside it. Who are you? Megan whispered, and this time the fear came out bare. Holden smiled again, still polite. I'm the person who can make it so you see your daughter more often, he said, then paused just long enough to force Megan to hear what came next. And I'm also the person who can make it so you don't see her again. Ever. Megan felt her knees soften. She wanted to shout for someone, wanted to run toward Bennett, wanted to find Tristan, but part of her understood that if she pulled Tristan in right now, she'd pull Noah and Ivy in too. She'd seen Ivy's eyes when her mother was mentioned, had seen Noah clutch safety like he was clutching his life. She couldn't turn them into targets because she wasn't hard enough. Holden watched that hesitation and knew he'd already won half. You don't have to answer right now, he said. I don't want you panicking. I want you smart. You're smart, Megan. You survived. Megan tightened her grip on the strap until her nails nearly bit into skin. I'm not working for you, she said, forcing her boundary back into place. Holden gave a soft laugh. I didn't tell you to work for me, he replied. I told you to stay away from Tristan. You just need to disappear from their lives. You're nothing to them. You're just a waitress. You're a passing gust of wind. Children forget. The line hit Megan like a slap, because she knew children don't forget. They only learn to be quiet so adults won't feel uncomfortable. And if I don't? Megan asked, her voice shaking but not breaking. Then what? Holden looked straight into her, and it was as if the crowd around them vanished. Then your case will be opened again, he said, and not in the way you want. A new paper will appear, a new accusation will be written, and people will say you're dangerous. People love believing a poor mother is dangerous. You understand. Megan understood too well. The world had believed stamped papers more than it believed the hands that held her child. Holden stepped back slightly, as if the meeting was finished. You'll do the right thing, he said, because you love your daughter. Then he turned and melted into the flow of people like he'd never existed. Megan stayed where she was, unable to draw a full breath, feeling like the blood had been drained out of her. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, not a strange message, but a notification from the work schedule. She looked at it and felt a bitter laugh rise in her throat. The world kept moving as if nothing had happened, while she'd just been pulled into a game with no rules. That night, Megan returned to her room, locked the door twice, drew the curtains, and sat on the floor with the shoebox holding the stuffed rabbit, forcing herself to stay calm. She meant to call Alyssa and say someone was watching her, but then she remembered Holden's eyes when he spoke about her file, and she was afraid any call might be listened to. She meant to text Tristan to warn him, but the image of Noah laughing on the swing, and then the image of Ivy folding in on herself when she mentioned her mother's scent, froze her hand. If she spoke, Tristan would tighten his protection, and protection in his world could become a trap if someone like Holden wanted to start a war. Megan couldn't be the spark, but she couldn't pretend she didn't know either. Near midnight, there was a soft knock at the door, not urgent, not hurried, the kind of knock someone gives to prove they can knock. Megan held her breath, her heart thudding in her throat. When the knocking stopped, something slid under the crack of the door. Megan waited a few more seconds before she dared to move, then she picked it up. A brown envelope with no sender. Inside were 2 glossy color photos, sharp in a way that felt merciless. Noah and Ivy in front of the school gate, in daylight, both faces circled in red. At the bottom was one line of writing, neat as a note on a file. All it takes is one wrong step. The next morning, Tristan didn't call Megan right away. He left a gap. Exactly what Bennett always advised when danger had a scent. Don't pull the target closer with your own urgency. Watch first. But it took less than a day of watching for Tristan to realize something had shifted. Megan still went to work, still replied to the message confirming the next meeting with short, polite lines. But the warm rhythm she'd carried in the park was gone, as if someone had drawn a curtain down between them. She didn't ask whether Noah had slept well, didn't mention whether Ivy felt any better, only said she had shifts, and it would depend on the situation. Tristan read those words the way you read a weather report warning of a storm. He wasn't used to being refused, and he was even less used to being refused by someone who wanted nothing from him. That was why Megan's change unsettled him more than any insult ever could. He called Bennett into his office. No music, no liquor, only security screens and a coldness settling between two men who'd long measured risk by instinct. Bennett set a folder on the desk, printed stills from the park cameras, several enlarged frames showing a man standing at the edge of the trail, always positioned to see Megan but never stepping directly into the family scene. Not one of mine, Bennett said, his voice firm. He was there before we arrived and he left after Megan. I had people look, but he disappeared like smoke. Tristan stayed silent, a fingertip tapping a slow beat on the desk, the same beat he used to hold anger in place. She's being watched, he said, not asking. Bennett nodded. And if she's being watched, the children are part of the math. Tristan felt a cord tighten around his chest. Noah and Ivy were downstairs with the new sitter Bennett had chosen, but Tristan could still hear Noah laughing at a cartoon, could hear Ivy turning picture book pages in silence, and that fragile normalness frightened him more than gunfire ever had. He went downstairs and sat beside them, trying to do what men like him were always bad at, being present without controlling. Noah lit up when he saw his father, but he still asked a question like a needle. Is Megan coming today? Tristan didn't lie. Not yet, he said, but I'm trying. Ivy didn't look up. She only tightened her grip on the page. Tristan watched them for a long moment, then spoke in a voice lower than usual. Not threatening, not ordering. If you're scared, tell me. If anyone makes you feel unsafe, tell me. Noah nodded, and Ivy said one sentence that made something in Tristan ache. You're always busy. Tristan didn't argue. He only swallowed hard and said a simple line he'd never truly said before. I'm here. That afternoon he decided to go to Riverton, but not as a guest. He went in through the back, through Alyssa, because he'd promised he'd do things the right way, with a reference, with limits. Alyssa looked at him with an expression that was both wary and understanding, then called Megan out to the storage area in the back. When Megan stepped in, Tristan saw at once she wasn't okay. Dark circles under her eyes, shoulders slightly braced, hands gripping her apron strings like a lifeline. She looked at him the way you look at risk, not at opportunity. Tristan didn't move closer. He didn't dress it up. What happened? He asked, straight and short. Megan shook her head. Nothing. Tristan held her gaze for one more beat, then lowered his voice, truly lowered it, the way you set a weapon down on the floor to prove your hands are empty. I know you're scared, he said, and I'm scared too. Megan looked up, a flicker of shock crossing her face as if she wasn't used to hearing the word scared from a man like him. Tristan continued, slow, each word passing through a narrow doorway. I'm not afraid of losing money. I'm not afraid of losing deals. I'm afraid of a day when I come back and my children look at me like I'm a stranger. I'm afraid they'll be touched just because they're mine. That night in the restaurant, I understood I can't buy peace for them. I need to learn how to hold that peace with presence. Megan bit her lip, her eyes shifting away like she wanted to hide, but Tristan didn't push. He only stood there, no raised voice, no forced step across her boundary. Alyssa quietly left, leaving the two of them in the scent of detergent and food. Megan whispered, almost too soft to hear. I shouldn't get involved. Tristan nodded. If you say stop, I'll stop. But I need to know why you changed your mind. Megan stayed silent for a long time, then finally let a small piece of herself show, not enough for Tristan to understand everything, but enough for him to see the wound. I have a child, she said, her voice thin, and I can't be with her. I lost because I'm poor, because my file is bad, because people said I was unstable. I don't want that happening again to anyone, especially not to your two kids. Tristan heard the word file, and his eyes went darker. Bennett had spoken about leaks, about people who used paperwork like blades. Tristan didn't ask for more, because he realized every question right now could be a hook dragging Megan under. He only said, "I won't use your life as a tool. I just want to protect the kids, and if you want, protect you too." Megan looked at him, eyes wet but not spilling. "You don't understand what your world will do to me," she said. Tristan answered at once, still low, "I do. And that's why I'm not bringing you to the house, not putting you inside my walls. We only meet in public, supervised, with Alyssa there if you need, in the way that feels safe to you." Megan didn't nod, and she didn't refuse either. She only let out a long breath like she was standing on the edge of a cliff. That night, Tristan went home and didn't order Noah to stop crying anymore. When Noah startled awake from a nightmare, Tristan didn't hand him a toy or promise to buy something. He sat down on the floor, put a hand on his own chest, and said, "Breathe with Dad." Noah copied him, the breath trembling at first, then slowing. Ivy stood in the doorway watching for a moment, then came closer, said nothing, only placed a finger on Tristan's wrist, like she was checking his pulse. Tristan looked at her and said one short line, "I'm here." Ivy didn't answer, but she didn't pull her hand away. They called it a safety ritual. Not because it was magic, but because it could be repeated whenever darkness returned. And just as Tristan thought the night had finally settled, Bennett stepped in, his face heavy as stone. "Someone just altered the pickup schedule in the system," Bennett said. "Tomorrow's route has been switched to a street with no city cameras. Not my people." That night, Tristan's house was no longer a quiet fortress. It trembled with sobs that had been held in too long, and with the truth that the enemy's hand had reached the edge of the children's world. Noah fell asleep in his father's arms, but jolted awake every time a car passed outside, and Ivy refused to go to bed, sitting close to the bedroom door with a pillow in her arms, eyes wide like an alarm light. Tristan had been ready to buy something huge, a rare toy, a trip far away, anything to pull the kids out of fear, because that was how he'd solved every problem, with strength, with money, with control. But tonight, watching Ivy shake and still try to be the big sister, Tristan understood that gifts couldn't repair a nervous system swept by a storm. Bennett brought a middle-aged woman into the house, soft in her manner, but steady in her eyes. Dr. Riley, a child therapist, Bennett said had been vetted carefully, with no ties to any network. Dr. Riley didn't ask about the ambush right away. She sat down on the floor at Noah and Ivy's level so they didn't have to look up. Then she talked about simple things, objects in the room, the color of the rug, the sound of the clock, helping the children's nervous systems return to the present. Noah clung to Tristan's hand. Ivy didn't cling, but her eyes never left the door. Dr. Riley explained in language that was easy to understand but not sugar-coated that some children, when afraid, would explode like Noah, crying, shaking, needing to cling, because their bodies were searching for an adult as shelter, while others would freeze like Ivy, silent, watching, controlling with their eyes. Because if she didn't control, she believed everything would collapse. 2 different responses, same root, Dr. Riley said. Fear of being left behind. Fear that there isn't anyone big enough to keep the world from breaking. Tristan flinched at the phrase big enough, because he'd thought he was big enough through power, and he was learning that big enough meant knowing how to kneel down and stay. Dr. Riley taught them a new house rule, not a Mafia rule, but a safety rule. Every time Noah or Ivy panicked, the adults would not shout, would not bargain, would not promise to buy something. They would only name the feeling, breathe with the child, and say one fixed sentence. "Dad is here. You're safe. We'll get through it together." Tristan practiced saying it, his voice stiff as stone at first, but he forced it to soften, because this wasn't negotiation. This was rescue. When Noah hiccuped and said he was scared, Tristan didn't say, "Be good" anymore. He looked into his son's eyes and said, "I'm sorry I scared you. I didn't protect you the way you needed. I'm here." Noah stared for a beat, then cried again. But this crying wasn't frantic. It sounded like a valve opening so the pressure could drain. Ivy stayed quiet, but when Tristan said, "I'm sorry," her eyes reddened, and Dr. Riley gave a small nod, as if that was what the children needed to hear, not a promise to buy another layer of locks. Megan was invited over, not as a savior, but as the person who'd touched the right nerve in the children and could help them rebuild their rhythm of peace. She came with a clear distance, not stepping deep into the house, not touching things, eyes on Tristan as if making sure he understood the boundary. Tristan didn't try to pull her in. He only told the truth in one sentence. I need your help, but I won't force you. Megan looked at Noah sleeping in broken pieces, looked at Ivy holding the pillow like armor, and then she nodded, light as an agreement with conditions. Dr. Riley spoke privately with Megan for a few minutes, asked about the way Megan had soothed them at the park, and Megan said it wasn't technique. It was only that there'd once been a child in her life who'd taught her how to breathe when her heart wanted to break. Tristan heard that and didn't ask more, but he looked at Megan longer than usual, and his gaze wasn't only gratitude anymore. There was something warm in it, something dangerous for both of them. Megan noticed and built her boundary back up with an even voice. I'm here for the kids. Only for the kids. I can't be their mother. I can't be a replacement. Tristan nodded and didn't argue, and that acceptance unsettled Megan more than flirting would have, because she was used to powerful men believing they had a right to take anything. In the days that followed, Tristan learned how to apologize the right way, not with gifts, but with time, sitting beside Noah as he practiced reading, sitting quietly while Ivy drew without peppering her with questions. Megan came sometimes, in public places or in the living room when Bennett and Dr. Riley were present, holding the boundary. But in small moments, when Noah held Megan's hand to point at letters, when Ivy unconsciously stood one step closer to Megan, something strange still began to sprout, a seed of family feeling that all three of them were afraid to name. And just as Tristan started to believe they could build a new layer of peace, Alyssa called Megan to the back of Riverton, her face pale. In Alyssa's hand was a thick envelope with an official seal. Alyssa spoke in a whisper, like she was afraid the walls could hear. Someone served a summons here. It's aimed at you. They want you in court, and they wrote the reason like you're the criminal. Megan held the summons envelope with hands gone cold, the feeling like being yanked backward into that old courtroom where people had once declared she wasn't fit to be a mother, with only a few stamped lines, but this time she wouldn't allow herself to collapse. She brought the paper to Tristan in the living room, with Noah and Ivy not there, only Bennett standing at a distance, and Dr. Riley having just left. Tristan read the page and his eyes darkened, but he didn't snatch it the way a man used to control would. He asked only one question. What do you want me to do? Megan let out a breath and tried to keep her voice from shaking. I want you not to do it for me. I want you to let me fight for myself, but I need you to protect the kids from this. Tristan nodded immediately, like a vow. Megan didn't say Holden's name. She didn't mention the night she'd been followed, because she was still afraid that if she said it out loud, she'd pull Noah and Ivy deeper into it. She only said someone was reopening her past, and if she kept running, they'd use it to choke her again. The next day, Megan asked for time off and went on her own to the county courthouse to request copies of her old file, standing in line among people like her, people without attorneys at their sides, people holding paperwork like a flotation device and still getting hit by waves. She reached the counter, spoke her name, spoke the year of the case, her voice rough but clear. The clerk handed her a list of fees and wait times. Megan looked at the numbers and felt her heart tighten, but she didn't walk away. She asked about fee waivers, asked how to file a request for copies due to hardship, asked each question like knocking on a hard door. At midday, Bennett appeared in the hallway, didn't step into her space, only placed a slip of paper in Megan's hand with the address of a low-cost legal aid center and their hours. Then he vanished again, as if the best help was the kind that didn't make her feel indebted. Megan went to that center and sat in a waiting room with plastic chairs and fluorescent lights, listening to tired voices call out case numbers. When it was her turn, she met a young lawyer named Lila, hair twisted up, eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. But she looked at Megan straight, like she was seeing a person, not a file. Megan handed over the new summons, the scraps of old papers she'd managed to keep, and told the story in short pieces. Losing custody, visits cut, the sense that someone was using the law like a trap. Lila didn't promise certainty. She asked what mattered. Dates, the name of the ex-husband's representative, witnesses, allegations. When Megan mentioned witnesses, Lila paused and asked whether Megan remembered the name of a neighbor who had testified that Megan yelled a lot and left her child alone. Megan remembered vividly, because she'd never met that neighbor. Lila typed and pulled up the statement, then pointed to a small line. The witness signature had strokes that looked exactly like the signature of an administrative staffer elsewhere in the file. Megan stared and her insides went cold. Lila spoke slowly. There are signs the signature was copied or forged. Megan didn't cry. She sat in silence for a moment, then pulled from her pocket a small USB drive wrapped carefully, the thing she'd once hidden inside the stuffed rabbit, like hiding a sliver of light. "I have this," Megan said, her voice rough. Lila plugged it in and listened to the recording. Not all of it, but enough to change her face. A man's voice talked about arranging witnesses, arranging signatures, arranging the file, and mentioned putting her in a supervision program because she's unstable. Lila looked up at Megan like she could see a new path opening, but she kept her composure. "We need to verify the source. We need a chain of custody. We need a proper way to submit it," Lila said. "But this isn't nothing." Megan left the Legal Aid Center with a packet of instructions, a list of records to request, and a strange feeling in her chest. Not naive hope, but the clear-eyed steadiness of someone who was finally willing to hold the blade instead of waiting to be cut. Tristan didn't ask what she planned to do with the USB. He only had Bennett arrange rides for Megan to the courthouse and the legal center along routes with cameras, coordinated her work schedule at Riverton through Alyssa so she'd have time to run paperwork, and increased security around Noah and Ivy's school without letting the children feel like they were being watched. Tristan also didn't hand Megan a stack of money, even though he easily could have. When Megan said she wouldn't take money, Tristan only nodded and said, "I'm not going to buy justice for you. I'm just going to make sure you have a chance to walk into the courthouse without getting shoved down the stairs." During those days, Noah and Ivy practiced their anchor routine regularly, breathing with their father, naming feelings, and Megan only appeared at therapy sessions when Dr. Riley was there, keeping the boundary clear. But in small moments, like when Noah handed Megan a drawing with 3 people standing under a tree, Megan felt her throat tighten, because she understood children always draw what they need. And just as Megan started collecting the key copies she needed, an article appeared on a local tabloid site, a loud headline about a waitress with a past of losing custody and a dangerous connection to a powerful boss, paired with a blurry photo of Megan at Riverton and another photo of Tristan holding Noah, as if they wanted to blend fatherhood with guilt. The next morning, Noah and Ivy's school called Tristan in, the principal's voice polite but tense, saying other parents had read the article and started asking questions about safety, and Tristan knew the predator had shifted the strike, no longer hitting him directly, but hitting the place his children were supposed to live as children. The dirty article spread faster than Tristan expected, not because it was true, but because people are always hungry for a story with a villain and someone powerful, and they don't need proof to swallow it. Noah and Ivy's school began to change its face. No one said it outright, but the looks in the schoolyard grew harder. The questions from other parents grew sharper, and the calls that were just to verify came in waves like water drilling through stone. Bennett increased the security layer, changed pickup routes, cut off press access angles, but every added layer made the children feel more like targets, and that was the most dangerous part. Noah began gripping his father's coat each morning, his eyes always scanning like he was searching for a lens. Ivy held a sharper kind of silence. She wasn't only observing anymore. She was starting to bristle at every adult because she felt they'd broken their promise that the park and the school would be normal places. Megan saw all of it, and she understood the article wasn't aimed only at her. It was aimed at the rare pocket of peace Noah and Ivy had just started building, like someone kicking down a sandcastle just to prove the beach belonged to them. Megan came to therapy with Dr. Riley and saw that Noah wasn't speaking anymore. He sat curled on the rug, mouth pressed tight, eyes down, not crying, not exploding. A child who explodes is still calling for help, but a child who goes quiet has learned that calling for help is useless. Dr. Riley asked gently. Noah didn't answer. Megan tried their anchor words, said safe, breathed with him. Noah still didn't answer. Ivy sat on the other side, fingers squeezing a colored pencil until her knuckles went white, staring at Megan with an expression that was both angry and hurting, as if Megan was someone who'd promised something and then left, even though Megan hadn't truly left yet. Tristan sat nearby, trying to hold steady, but his hand trembled slightly on his knee, and no one saw it except Megan. The session ended in a strange suffocation, as if the air had been pulled out of the room. Tristan walked Megan to the door, with Bennett not hovering close because Tristan wanted one real minute of conversation, though Bennett still stayed far enough to make sure no stranger could come near. Tristan asked whether Megan was okay, and Megan looked at him, eyes red, voice trying to stay firm. "I'm not okay, and that's why I have to stop." Tristan thought he'd misheard. "Stop what?" he asked, and the question sounded too much like pleading. Megan drew a deep breath and spoke like a cut. "I'm leaving. I'm not coming anymore. I'll change shifts, Change routes. I'll disappear from the children. Tristan took half a step forward and stopped, remembering his promise not to force her. Because of the article? He asked. Megan shook her head and glanced past his shoulder toward the living room where Noah sat unmoving. Because of them, she said. The more I show up, the more reason they have to drag them into this. They want to use me as a chain to yank your throat, and that chain is whipping the two kids. Tristan wanted to say he could shield them. He could lock down the media. He could crush the writer. He could make the whole city go quiet, but he looked into Megan's eyes and knew she wasn't afraid he wasn't strong enough. She was afraid that strength would make the war bigger, and the children would be the first place the bullets landed. I'm handling my case, Megan went on, her voice smaller now. I'll meet Lila. I'll go to court, but I'll do it at a distance that doesn't touch your family anymore. I'm sorry. Tristan swallowed hard. He'd lost his wife once, and that loss had felt like someone cutting a power line. Everything went dark at the same time. He'd lived 5 years in a frozen state, and that night at Riverton, Megan's 5 words had made something in him move again. Now, hearing Megan say disappear, he felt like someone was reaching for the switch again. You don't owe me an apology, he said, his voice rough. I'm the one who owes. Megan shook her head, like she didn't want to hear more because hearing more would soften her. She stepped down onto the stoop, yellow light spilling over her hair, making her look fragile like someone a gust could carry away. I'm not their mother, she said one last time, as if reminding herself. And I can't be the bait they use to reach them. Then she walked away, fast, without looking back, because looking back would make it impossible to leave. Inside, Noah watched Megan vanish past the glass door and didn't react. He only set the drawing of 3 people under a tree on the floor, then slowly pulled it closer to his chair, like he was hiding something precious where no one could see. Ivy broke. She shot to her feet, ran to the door, slammed her hand against the glass, and screamed for the first time in days. Why is she leaving? Tristan wrapped Ivy in his arms. She fought him, face flushed, tears pouring out from anger and fear, while Noah stayed silent. That night, Tristan went up to Noah's room, sat on the edge of the bed the way he'd been learning to do, repeated the safety ritual, breathed with him, apologized, but Noah turned his face to the wall and didn't answer, as if he'd decided words couldn't be trusted. Tristan stood, walked out into the hallway, and felt loss hit his chest like physical pain, like that night in the hospital when the machines went quiet. He'd thought he was used to death. It turned out he was only used to making himself numb. Near midnight, Bennett knocked on Tristan's office door and handed him something tiny that the sitter had found under Noah's pillow while straightening the blankets. It was a small piece of paper folded clumsily, a child's handwriting trembling, with only a few simple words. Dad, don't make Megan disappear. Tristan stared at the words, heat rising in his eyes, and for the first time in years he sank into his chair like he'd been knocked down, because he understood Noah hadn't gone silent because he was done hurting. Noah had gone silent because he was afraid his pleading would be left behind again. Noah's little note sat in Tristan's coat pocket all day like a hot stone. Touching it hurt. Taking it out left him empty. His counsel called an emergency meeting the very next night, not in a bright glass boardroom like their usual negotiations, but in a tighter room, where men who were used to speaking with their eyes and making decisions with silence leaned in close. They called Holden by different names, but the meaning was one thing. He'd touched the family, and their rule was to return it twice over. An older partner, who'd been beside Tristan since Tristan was a young man learning to count debt in blood, set his hand on the table and spoke plainly. Cut off his heir. Make him disappear. One night, and everything goes quiet. Another man added, let him live and he'll smile at your weakness. Tristan listened, felt rage rise like fuel flame, and then he saw Noah's face turn to the wall. Saw Ivy slamming her hand against the glass. Saw a child's handwriting that said, don't make Megan disappear. If he chose war, the children wouldn't only be afraid. They'd grow up in a world where violence was always the answer. The same loop he'd once sworn he would break. Tristan placed both hands on the table. His voice wasn't loud, but the room went still. No. Eyes turned toward him like blades. You've gone soft, someone said. Tristan didn't argue. He only told the truth, for the first time in that room. I have children, and I'm not turning my home into a battlefield to satisfy your anger. They scoffed, talked about honor, talked about deterrence, talked about how Holden wouldn't stop. Tristan nodded. Agreed Holden wouldn't stop, then shifted the direction. Then we make him stop with law. Evidence. A clean arrest. I want him in prison, not Ash. I want him unable to come back with a revenge story. The room felt heavy as lead. Someone started to object. But Bennett, standing behind Tristan, spoke, his voice cold enough to cut through feeling. Mr. Caldwell is right. Holden is waiting for a violent move so he can legalize the hunt. If we strike the old way, he'll turn Noah and Ivy into the reason, and he'll turn Megan into proof that the Caldwell family is dangerous. Tristan glanced at Bennett, a look that said continue. Bennett set a new file on the table, not thick, but heavy where it mattered. I traced the schedule alteration, Bennett said. The driver admits Holden wanted the waitress. But that's only the tip. Bennett turned a page, exposing shell company names and roundabout transfers. Holden is connected to a group of lawyers who specialize in custody battles, and to a private medical network that's been investigated for altering records. Tristan felt his heart drop a beat. Medical network. Altering records. The words sounded like metal scraping an old scar. Bennett held Tristan's gaze and spoke slowly, like he didn't want Tristan to stab himself on memory. I found the name of a doctor who signed the report on your wife's death. That person has taken consulting money from a fund tied to Holden. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Tristan heard blood pounding in his ears, remembered the hospital's antiseptic smell, remembered his wife's hand cooling in his, remembered the word complication said as lightly as wind to cover a storm. He'd lived 5 years with a question hanging open. Why? Now that question had a shape, a wire, and Holden's name stood in the middle like a knot. The council fell silent, because this wasn't a territory conflict anymore. This was dirtier, more systemic, and more dangerous than street violence. Tristan drew a deep breath, his voice rough but steady. We collect evidence. I want every transfer, every call, every signature. I want him in cuffs in front of cameras, because I want my children to see that justice can exist without blood. Someone shook his head and called it dreaming, but no one argued anymore, because they saw something in Tristan's eyes that was scarier than rage. The resolve of a man who'd already lost too much and refused to lose more. The meeting ended. Tristan didn't drink. He didn't go anywhere. He went up to Noah's room, placed the note under the nightlight, then wrote his own answer on the back, handwriting stiff but trying to soften. I won't make her disappear. I'll do this right. The next morning, he didn't let himself pull Megan back with emotion. He went to her boarding house alone, leaving Bennett in the car at a distance, not stepping in. Megan opened the door with eyes that stayed cautious, always ready to shut it again. Tristan didn't ask to come in. He stood in the narrow hallway and spoke in a low voice so the neighbors wouldn't hear, and so he wouldn't turn it into a performance of power. I'm not here to pull you back. I'm here to tell you I understand why you left. Megan stayed silent. Tristan continued, not defending himself, only owning it. I made you a target. I let my world touch you. I'm sorry. Megan studied him a long moment, then said flatly, Sorry doesn't make the article disappear. Tristan nodded. No, but sorry can be the start of doing it right. He pulled out a folded sheet. Not money, not a contract. A copy of part of Bennett's investigation with sensitive names covered. Only enough for Megan to see one thing. Holden wasn't a petty harasser. Holden was a network. He's coming after you because you're my weak point, Tristan said. But also because he thinks you're easy to crush. I'm not using violence to solve him, because if I do, I'll turn Noah and Ivy into an excuse. I'm collecting clean evidence, and I need a chance to do right by you. Megan gave a small, bitter laugh, but her eyes were wet. What chance? She asked. Tristan held her gaze and didn't step closer. A chance to protect the kids without pushing you out of the story. A chance to coordinate with you in a way you control. I won't force you to be near the kids. I'm only asking you not to fight alone, because that's what he wants, for you to be alone. Megan exhaled, as if weighing fear against a thin line of cooperation. Tristan took Noah's note out, not like a weapon, but like a truth. Megan looked at the child's words and her face cracked for one beat. Tristan didn't plead. He only spoke one last sentence, so small it was almost a whisper. I can't change the past, but I can choose my children over war. And if you'll allow it, I want to choose you being safe too. Megan didn't let Tristan into the room, but she didn't shut the door in his face anymore either. She leaned against the doorframe and read Noah's note with red-rimmed eyes, and for the first time in days her voice wasn't only defense. I don't want to be the reason they're targeted. Tristan nodded, keeping the distance he'd promised. Then we do this in a way that doesn't turn them into the reason, he said. Megan looked at the page Tristan had brought, the investigation summary with sensitive names blacked out, but enough to show the links between Holden and custody lawyers, enough to show money circling through a private medical fund. Her spine went cold, because this wasn't just one man making threats on a sidewalk anymore. It was a system that knew how to use paper to turn living people into the guilty. Megan closed her eyes for one beat, then chose not to let fear steer her anymore. I'm going to meet with Lila, she said. I'm going to request a protective order. I'm going to ask the court to review my file, and I'm going to file an objection to the summons through the proper process. Tristan didn't cut in. He asked only one question. What do you need to do it? Megan met his eyes and answered clean. I need safety getting to court without being tailed, and I need admissible evidence, not intimidation. Tristan nodded, like the sentence had freed him from an old habit. Bennett will handle routes, cameras, witnesses, he said. You handle the legal side. I won't touch the judge's decision with money. Hearing that gave Megan a strange feeling, half suspicion, half relief, because she was used to powerful people buying roads or pushing others down to walk. Tristan was choosing a harder road, a cleaner one, and a more dangerous one for himself. They set a new rule right there in the narrow hallway. No private meetings unless necessary. All communication about the case through Lila and Bennett. All travel schedules changing constantly. And most important, Noah and Ivy were not to hear a single sentence about Holden. Megan nodded. Then a confession slipped out of her like it had been waiting. I thought I was just unlucky. I thought I lost because I was poor. I thought I did something wrong, so I lost my child. Tristan watched her and didn't interrupt. Megan swallowed and continued. But if Holden was behind those lawyers, if he has ties to the hospital and people who alter records, then I didn't only lose because I was weak. I was crushed. Tristan didn't deny it. He spoke slowly, voice rough. So was I. Megan looked up like she couldn't believe him. Tristan didn't give a long story. He gave her one piece of truth he'd been swallowing for 5 years. My wife died after giving birth, he said. They called it complications. I believed it, because I was busy burying myself in work and in anger. But Bennett just found that the doctor who signed her report has a financial connection to a fund tied to Holden. Megan felt her heart drop. A death, a custody loss, 2 tragedies that had seemed unrelated, suddenly resting in the same hand. Tristan continued, and now his voice lowered, as if speaking too hard would make the wound bleed. I'm not saying Holden killed her. I'm saying there are irregular signs someone covered up. And if that's true, Holden didn't only come at me through my kids. He's had his hand on me since before I even knew. Megan stood still. In her mind, she saw the courtroom from that year. The stranger witness, the strange signature, the psychological evaluation that made her look dangerous. She remembered being looked at like a criminal because she couldn't afford a good lawyer. And now she saw a bigger picture, where people like her were crushed to feed the interests of people like Holden. He doesn't need us dead, Megan said, her voice shaking. He only needs us to lose everything until we separate from each other. Tristan nodded. That's why we don't separate, he said. We form an alliance. The word landed like a deal from Tristan's world, but here it meant something else. A bond built on moral choice, not profit. Megan took a deep breath and offered her part. I'll work with Lila to request orders compelling records, to request copies, to find the inconsistencies in testimony. I'll make sure everything goes through the proper channels, so when we submit evidence they can't claim coercion. Tristan answered at once. I'll have Bennett trace the money and the contacts. I'll gather video, logs, the altered route, the driver's statement, and everything tied to surveillance. I won't touch the children by putting them forward as evidence. Megan looked at him, and for the first time she saw not only power in Tristan's eyes, but real fear. Fear of losing again, and that fear made him human. She nodded. Okay, Megan said, but if there's any moment I see the kids being pulled in, I stop. Tristan nodded, and didn't bargain. I'll listen. They stood there for another beat, like 2 people who'd just signed a contract with truth. Tristan turned to go, still keeping his distance, but before he went down the stairs, he said one line that wasn't strategy, only admission. I thought all I needed was to be strong. Turns out I need to be right. Megan didn't answer, but she didn't slam the door either. That night, Megan spoke with Lila on a secure call, set filing dates, prepared the list of requests for the court to compel documents, and Bennett sent her a list of witnesses who could confirm she wasn't what the file described. Everything began to take shape, to form lines and structure, and that forced Holden to change his play. As Megan was folding papers into her bag, her phone vibrated. It was Alyssa, but it wasn't Alyssa's voice. A man's voice, deep and familiar enough to freeze her spine, came through as if he were standing right behind her. "Megan, your manager is with me. If you want her back intact, you come alone. Stop playing law with me." Megan ended the call with hands turned rigid and cold. The sensation like an invisible hand had just closed around her throat, but instead of collapsing, she stood up, locked the door, and immediately called Tristan on the secure line Bennett had set up. Tristan answered almost at once, his voice not panicked but sharp. "Talk." Megan told it fast, without extra feeling, only the facts. Holden was holding Alyssa and demanding Megan come alone. On the other end, there was a beat of silence, a beat Megan recognized as Tristan pressing his rage down to the floor. "No," Tristan said, and for the first time he gave her a single word like an order. "You're not going." Megan bit her lip. "I have to," she said. "Alyssa isn't involved. She's just a working person. She protected me at Riverton, and now she's being pulled in because of me." Tristan exhaled, his voice lowering, trying to keep the promise not to control her. "If you go, it's a trap." Megan looked at the shoebox with the stuffed rabbit in the corner, looked at Lila's papers, looked at the dirty line tightening around the necks of two women with no power. "I know," Megan said, "but a trap can also be where you get evidence, if I go and keep control." Tristan stayed silent longer. Then Bennett's voice came in from behind him, velvet-wrapped steel. "Mr. Caldwell, we can turn the meeting into a snare, but Megan has to understand the rules. If she goes off script, we have one chance. One mistake, and we lose everything." Megan swallowed, but her voice stayed steady. "I understand. I'm not going to die. I'm going to drag him into the light." Tristan didn't forbid it anymore. He only asked, each word forced soft, "What do you need?" Megan answered clearly. A compact recording device, a backup phone, a route in and a route out with cameras, someone watching from far enough to intervene but not close enough for Holden to smell. And most important, Tristan could not appear directly, because Holden was trying to pull Tristan into a violent reflex. Tristan said, "Okay, I won't show my face. I'll be on the outer ring." Hearing outer ring made Megan's heart pound, because it sounded like an agreement between two people walking a wire. Bennett came to Megan that same night, didn't enter her room, stood in the hallway and handed her a clip microphone and a tiny recorder, no bigger than a finger, showed her how to turn it on, how to turn it off, how to conserve battery, how to speak so she'd capture the other person's voice without turning it into a confession. He also gave her a code phrase if things broke. If she said, "I forgot my keys," it meant immediate intervention. Megan nodded and memorized it the way you memorize survival. Tristan didn't say much. He texted one line, "I'm not saving you. I'm shielding you. You keep control." The line tightened Megan's throat, because it was exactly what she needed to hear. Not a romantic promise, but respect. Holden's location was an old warehouse at the edge of an industrial zone, where streetlights were sparse and city cameras even sparser. Megan didn't drive straight there. She gave Bennett the time, the rental plate number, and she changed her coat, changed her hair, as if that could throw off a watcher. When Megan got close, she saw the warehouse door cracked open, cold white light spilling out like an operating room. She stepped inside, and every footfall carried the sound of her own heart. Alyssa was tied to a chair, her mouth taped, eyes red but alert, looking at Megan like she wanted to scream, "Don't come in." Holden stood behind her with a glass of liquor in his hand, jacket clean like he'd come from a party, not like a kidnapper, and that cleanliness was what made him frightening. "You came fast," he said calmly. "I appreciate loyalty." Megan kept her distance, didn't run to Alyssa, because running would pin her into a corner. "Let her go," Megan said, forcing her voice even. Holden gave a small smile. "Don't give orders," he said. "You're just a waitress, but you interest me. Someone like you, dragging law into this game." Megan ground her teeth inside, but kept her pace on the outside. "What do you want? You've got me here." Holden took one step forward, his eyes flicking to Megan's collar like he was searching for what was hidden. Megan kept her hands natural and didn't touch the mic. I want you to stop working with Tristan, Holden said. Stop seeing the lawyer. Stop digging through files. You need to disappear. Megan repeated it, to make him say it clearly. Disappear from where? Holden shrugged, a thin smile. From the city, from the story, from your easy little life. Megan swallowed hard, then said the line she'd prepared to pull him into admissions. You're afraid I'll find out who dirtied my file. Holden laughed like she'd told a joke. Your file was already dirty, he said. You only survive because people pity you. I'm just reminding the world. Megan forced herself calm and continued, each word set like bait. You reminded them by taking Alyssa. You reminded them by altering Noah and Ivy's pickup schedule. You reminded them by using a fake witness. Holden stared at her, a flicker of annoyance flashing. Then he stepped closer, close enough for his voice to drop straight into the microphone. You think you're so smart. A witness is a witness. A signature is a signature. You want to sue, sue. You want to scream, scream. In the end, people still believe paperwork. Megan's stomach twisted, because he was right about the world that had crushed her. But she kept going, trying to pull him toward Tristan, and Tristan's wife. You used paperwork with the hospital too. Holden's mouth curled, his voice lowering as if he enjoyed other people's pain. Don't talk about that. You don't have the right. Megan's heart jumped, because that was proof he knew, and he knew deeply. She asked slowly, So you let Alyssa go? And I'll stop. Holden tilted his head, eyes locked on Megan. No, you have to prove it. You have to do something for me. Megan held her tone. What? Holden pointed to a phone on the table. Call Tristan. Tell him you're leaving him. Tell him you're disappearing because of him. I want to hear his reaction. I want to see if his weakness is still soft. Cold ran up Megan's spine, because this was what Holden had wanted all along. Not her, but Tristan's reflex. The violent reflex that would give Holden an excuse to smash the family. Megan looked at the phone, then at Alyssa struggling in the chair, eyes begging. She knew that if she didn't call, Alyssa could die. But if she called wrong, Noah and Ivy could be pulled into war. She was choosing inside a trap with no clean path. Megan walked to the table and picked up the phone, her palm slick with sweat. And in that moment, in another room a few blocks away, Noah and Ivy were lying in bed, unable to sleep because they'd been hearing adults whisper too long. Ivy quietly opened the door and tugged Noah with her, the high children going down the stairs like two small shadows. At the exact moment Bennett was busy monitoring Megan's microphone signal, they slipped past the distracted sitter and climbed into the open trunk of Bennett's SUV just before he closed it and drove away. No one noticed the two tiny passengers hidden beneath a heavy equipment blanket as the car sped toward the industrial zone, making the counter-trap plan start to vibrate like a rope about to snap. Megan held the phone with a heartbeat that felt like it could break her ribs. She knew Holden was right behind her. She knew Alyssa was tied up, staring at her with a pleading look. She knew Bennett was out there, hearing every breath through the microphone. She dialed Tristan's number as ordered, but she didn't let it ring long, only long enough for the system to register. Then she spoke into the receiver in a steady voice, like reading a line she'd rehearsed. I forgot my keys. Holden frowned, not understanding yet, and Megan turned to face him. You want to hear Tristan's reaction? Then let me say it plain. Your weak point isn't Tristan. Your weak point is that you think everyone will kneel. Holden smiled, but the smile fractured when a very small sound came from the warehouse door. Not the sound of adults, but the scuff of children's shoes on cement. Megan froze first, then Holden snapped his head around. Noah and Ivy stood in the doorway like two small shadows, coats tugged crooked, faces pale with fear, and still they stepped inside because they believed that wherever Megan was, it would be safe. The sight made the air feel like it exploded. Holden's eyes lit up like a man receiving a gift dropped from the sky. He moved fast toward the children, hand rising as if to snatch, and in that same moment, Tristan appeared at the opposite entrance. Not loud, not roaring, his gaze dark and cold as night. Tristan didn't charge Holden. He charged Noah and Ivy. He had only one priority: get them out of the predator's reach before anything else happened. To me, Tristan commanded in a low voice, and Noah ran to him immediately. But Ivy halted for one beat, too shocked. Her mind jammed between two poles as she looked at Holden and then at Tristan. Megan shouted one familiar anchor word, not for Holden, but for Ivy. Ivy, hold hands. Ivy snapped awake, Reached out, Noah grabbed her and pulled her toward him, and Tristan turned his body into a shield, wrapping both children to his chest like living armor. Holden cursed, his voice losing its courtesy, his hand reaching out. But a figure cut him off. Bennett appeared from outside like a trapdoor, sealing the outer ring with men who'd been hidden in place. No gunfire, only wrists twisted, knees pressed, joints locked in fast, clean motion. But Holden wasn't the kind of man who surrendered easily. He stepped back and drew a small knife from his jacket, the blade flashing under the white light, and he gave a dry laugh. Now we'll see who controls who. Tristan didn't lunge. He kept Noah and Ivy behind him, eyes on Holden, but his ears on his children's breathing, on Noah's first hiccuping sobs as the boy's body slid back toward the cliff of panic. Megan stepped forward one pace, not reckless, but because she understood what Holden wanted was Tristan losing control. And if Tristan lost control, everything they'd built would collapse. "Noah, look at me," Megan said, her voice soft but firm, like laying a blanket over fire. "Breathe with me." Noah still shook, but his eyes found Megan like an anchor. Megan breathed slowly, in and out, and spoke the key words. "Here, safe. Hold hands." Ivy began to cry, the sound breaking out of her for only the second time in her life. Not anger now, but terror. And Megan looked straight at Ivy and didn't tell her to stop, only said, "You're scared. You're allowed to be scared, but you're here with Dad. Dad is holding you." Tristan heard that, tightened his hold without hurting, and for the first time Ivy pressed her face into her father's shoulder and cried like a child, not trying to be the adult anymore. Holden snarled and slashed the knife toward Megan as a threat, but Bennett drove in, clamped Holden's wrist, and the knife dropped with a sharp clatter on the floor. Holden still fought, eyes wide, and his voice spat filth like another blade. "You think you won. Your file was written by me. Your witness was mine. You lost your child because you were poor, because I wanted it that way. And Tristan's wife, that was just a mistake that can be arranged." The confession fell like blood, and Bennett immediately lifted the recording device, hit confirm, and at the same time men in dark jackets surged in through the back door with badges. Not Tristan's people, but law enforcement Bennett had coordinated in advance to make an on-scene arrest the moment the words were enough. Holden jolted, realizing he'd said too much, but it was too late. He was driven to the floor and cuffed, the metal clicking shut with a final sound like a period at the end of a sentence. Alyssa was untied, the tape ripped away, and she coughed hard, tears spilling, but she still managed to rasp, "Megan, run." Megan didn't run. When she saw Holden in cuffs, when she saw Noah and Ivy held against Tristan's chest, when she heard Ivy's crying turn gradually into breathing, Megan's body finally gave out like a cord stretched too long. She stepped back, gripped the table edge, her vision dimming, breath skipping. Tristan called her name, but Megan only had time to look at Noah once, to see him still holding Ivy's hand, and then everything in her collapsed. Megan crumpled, falling toward the cold concrete, exhausted like someone who'd held up the whole world with bare hands. Megan woke to the smell of antiseptic and white light, but this time she wasn't lying alone with that abandoned feeling she'd carried through exhaustion before. Bennett stood beside the bed, silent as a marker stone, and Tristan sat in the chair near the door, his hands laced together, his eyes red from no sleep, but not frantic. Megan shifted slightly and Tristan rose at once, then stopped exactly one step short, not touching her unless she allowed it, and asked softly, "Are you hurting?" Megan shook her head, throat dry, but in her chest there was something hotter than pain, the feeling that she'd survived. Bennett set a sealed evidence bag on the cabinet, his voice low. "The recording has been backed up 3 ways. The police have filed the report. Holden was arrested on site with a confession. Alyssa is safe." Megan closed her eyes for a beat and tears spilled before she could stop them, because Holden was no longer a ghost in her throat. He had a body, cuffs, a file with his name on it. Lila came to the hospital that same night, hair messy, eyes bright, carrying a notebook and a faith hard as steel. She didn't offer empty comfort. She opened her laptop and read Megan the next steps. File a motion to reopen the old ruling based on new evidence. Request the court compel the original documents. Request an investigation into the forged signature and the fabricated witness. And most of all, request the visitation schedule be changed from supervised, like a prisoner, to meaningful parenting time long enough to be a mother in real life. Megan listened to every word with shaking hands, because she'd once sat in court and listened to someone cut her motherhood away like snipping a thread, easy in a way that had felt obscene. This time she had evidence, but she was still afraid, because court isn't a place where feelings win. Lila looked at Megan and said one sentence that was small but solid. This time, you're not asking for mercy. You're demanding justice. Tristan didn't step into the legal conversation. He only provided what Megan needed so she could walk that road without being shoved off it. Rides with cameras, closed schedules, outer ring protection, and a small meeting room at Lila's office where they could work without tabloid lenses camping outside. He didn't mention money. He didn't say he'd handle everything, because he'd learned the hardest lesson of all. Doing it for someone turns them into debt. When Lila asked whether Tristan was willing to testify, Tristan nodded immediately, but he made one point clear. I'll testify to the truth, not to apply pressure. On the court date, Megan wore a simple blouse, hair tied back, no heavy makeup, because she didn't want to look like someone performing a victim. She wanted to look like a mother standing up. Outside there were a few hidden lenses, but Bennett sealed the perimeter with silence. No scuffle, only making sure they had no angle. In the courtroom, Megan saw her ex-husband wasn't present, only his attorney, and it felt like a sign. When a dirty system is exposed, the people who were strong because of it often hide behind paperwork. Lila presented cleanly, introduced the recorded evidence with a clear chain of custody, introduced the on-scene statements, introduced proof that a signature had been copied, introduced the cross-check showing a witness who didn't exist, and when she reached the part where Holden confessed, the courtroom turned to stone. Megan sat still, didn't cry, only breathed in the rhythm she'd learned with Noah and Ivy, because she understood she had to stand on spine, not on tears. Tristan was called as a witness. He stepped to the stand without a power costume, only as a father. He spoke about how Megan had helped stabilize the children. No embellishment, only what could be verified. Therapy sessions with Dr. Riley, the safety ritual, Megan holding boundaries, Megan refusing money, Megan putting the kids ahead of herself. When the opposing attorney tried to suggest Tristan had been seduced or bought by emotion, Tristan looked straight at him and said one sentence that made the room go even quieter. I'm the man who used to believe everything could be bought. I was wrong. She isn't for sale. It wasn't a strike so much as an admission, and it tightened Megan's throat. The hearing didn't end in instant miracle, but the judge issued a temporary order that mattered like a door cracked open, lifting the unreasonable restrictions from the old ruling, granting Megan expanded visitation without supervision at a family center, and opening the procedure to review custody based on the forgery investigation. Megan stepped into the hallway with legs soft as cotton, but this time soft from relief. Lila squeezed her shoulder gently and whispered, "You just got part of your motherhood back through law." Tristan stood a few steps away, didn't touch, only looked at Megan like he couldn't quite believe it was real. When Megan got home, Noah and Ivy ran out. Noah didn't fling himself at her the way he used to. He stopped for one beat, like he was afraid he'd lose her again. Then he came forward and held out a new drawing of 3 people under a tree. But this time, there was a yellow sun in the corner. "Megan," Noah said, his voice small. Ivy stood beside him, eyes red but not crying, and she let out one word so softly, like she was testing whether it would be safe to say it. "Mom." Megan. Not a full calling, not a replacement, only a small step, a new name tried carefully on the tongue without breaking into pain. Megan froze, then dropped to her knees and hugged both children very gently, like holding something fragile she didn't dare squeeze. Tristan watched and his throat tightened until he couldn't speak. That night, after the children were asleep, Tristan stood with Megan in the living room, the yellow lamplight calmer than the storm days. He opened his mouth like he wanted to say something huge, something that had lived in his chest from Riverton's dining room to the cold warehouse. But he stopped, remembering his promise not to force, remembering the boundary Megan had built with her whole life. He looked at her and asked in a voice that was real, not command, not possession, "Megan, what do you want now?" Tristan asked Megan what she wanted now, and the question hung in the living room like an open door no one dared push through too hard. Megan looked down at her hands, fingers that had trembled holding a summons, fingers that had gripped the edge of a table in the warehouse, still marked with faint indentations like a reminder that anything good could be yanked away at any moment. "I want peace," she said softly. I want to see my daughter on the new schedule without being afraid someone will snatch her out of my hands. I want Noah and Ivy to go to school without being looked at like targets. I want everything normal. Tristan nodded and didn't smile, because he understood normal was their most expensive luxury. He stood there without moving closer, but his voice softened the way it does when someone sets their heart on the table and doesn't demand you pick it up. I want normal too, he said, but I don't know how to go back to being normal with a snap. I only know how to learn again. Megan lifted her eyes and saw that the cold of his power wall was gone, replaced by something bare, the tired truth of a man who'd lived too long in war mode and now had to learn how to live in family mode. Tristan drew a deep breath and spoke slowly so each word wouldn't turn into an empty promise. I don't need you to fix me. I don't need you to save me. I just want to ask permission to stay. Megan went rigid. In her life, men had often asked in a way that demanded. They'd used love like a trap. Tristan was speaking like someone afraid of hurting her. Stay as what? Megan asked, keeping distance in her voice, because distance was the only thing that had ever kept her alive. Tristan met her gaze and didn't dodge. Stay as someone who builds a home with you, not this mansion. Home is where the kids can breathe without watching the door. Home is where I don't use violence as the answer. Home is where you don't have to be afraid of losing again. The word home tightened Megan's chest. She wanted to believe, but the memory of losing motherhood, of her daughter being pulled from her, of promises that had dissolved like smoke, wouldn't let her jump into hope. You and I aren't from the same world, Megan said, eyes red, voice still clear. Your world has guns, dead bodies, things I don't want the kids to ever hear about. And me. I'm just a waitress who got crushed. If I step in, I'll be crushed again, except this time I'll drag the kids in with me. Tristan didn't argue, because he knew it was true. He only spoke about what he could control, himself. I won't deny I lived wrong. I won't deny I carry darkness, but I'm choosing differently. I chose my kids over war. I'll keep choosing that, if you'll give me a chance. Megan shook her head slightly, tears falling without sound. A chance is the most expensive thing. I can't survive losing one more time. Tristan swallowed hard. He took one step forward, then stopped, as if asking permission through distance. Then we set conditions, he said, voice steady, not to force her, but to hold the ground. No vague promises. Clear terms, clear rules. If I break them, you have the right to walk away. Megan watched him like she was weighing whether this man would truly accept being bound. Tristan continued. Therapy for the kids stays with Dr. Riley. I'll go into therapy too. Learn to regulate anger and control without pressing other people down. Full transparency with you on anything tied to the kids' safety, schedules, risks. No violence around the kids, even if I'm insulted, even if I'm challenged. If there's conflict, I remove them from the scene first, always. And you set your boundaries too, what you won't accept. Megan breathed out, like she was hearing a contract her heart wanted to sign, while fear still held the pen. I want transparency, she said, small but firm. I don't want another day where the tabloids throw something out there and you handle it by making someone disappear. I don't want Noah and Ivy growing up thinking making people disappear is normal. Tristan nodded at once, like she'd hit exactly where she needed to. I agree, he said. I won't do that. I'll choose the clean road, even when it's hard. And if I feel myself slipping, I'll tell you. I won't hide it. Megan wiped her tears and looked at him for a long time, then said what made both of them shake. If we do this, it's for the kids, and because we truly want it, not because I feel sorry, not because you need someone to fill a hole. Tristan answered, voice rough but clear. I don't want you to fill a hole. I want you to be the person who chooses to stand beside me, because you want to. Megan gave the smallest nod, like she was testing whether the floor would collapse. Okay, she said, but slow, one step at a time. Tristan didn't touch her. He only exhaled like a man who'd just been allowed to live. They thought the conversation was only between two adults, but at the top of the stairs, two small shadows stood still. Noah held his stuffed bear, eyes wet, and Ivy gripped the railing until her hand went white. Noah didn't run down this time. He only said one small sentence, his voice thick. Dad, don't make her disappear again. Tristan turned and felt his heart clench. Ivy stepped down one stair, tears rolling, and she didn't wipe them away, and she spoke like she was writing a new law for herself. If grown-ups promise, they have to do it. Tristan dropped to his knees at the foot of the stairs and pulled both children into his arms, no longer hiding the tremble in his voice. I hear you. I'll do it. And if I'm wrong, I'll apologize and fix it. Megan stood behind him with a hand pressed to her chest, too choked to speak, because in that moment she understood this wasn't a fairy tale confession. This was a request to stay under a child's conditions. Simple and merciless. Presence, honesty, and no abandonment. The house didn't change its architecture after the night the two children stood at the top of the stairs and set conditions for the adults, but the air inside it changed, as if someone had opened a window that had always been kept shut. The yellow light in the dining room no longer fell over a long, cold table built for silent dinners. It spread instead across 4 chairs pulled close together. Tristan came home on time more often, his phone face down instead of beside his plate. And if a call mattered, he asked permission to step away from the table instead of listening while he nodded along. Megan no longer stood at the edge of the kitchen like a guest. She sat with them, telling Noah and Ivy about seeing her daughter at the family center, about being able to tie the little girl's hair with her own hands during the new visitation time, about a smile that was still hesitant, but no longer afraid. Noah listened the way you listen to a fairy tale you can touch, and Ivy asked questions sharp as needles, wanting to know how old the girl was, whether she liked drawing or liked reading, and Megan answered each one, not hiding the ache of missing her child but not painting it pretty either. After dinner they moved into the living room, where the drawing of 3 people under a tree had been framed and hung beside the staircase, and next to it was the newer picture with a sun in the corner. Tristan didn't hang it like a trophy. He hung it like a reminder that family isn't defined by blood or money. It's defined by presence repeated every day. Before bedtime, Noah carried his stuffed bear downstairs and asked Megan to tell the safe breathing story again, while Ivy lay on her back staring at the ceiling and said softly that if grown-ups kept their word, kids would learn how to trust again. Tristan sat on the edge of the bed and listened to them, feeling warm and aching at the same time, because he knew peace wasn't something you earned once and keep forever. Peace is something you guard, you water, you repair when cracks appear. In the next room, Megan checked her phone and saw a message from Lila, saying her custody review hearing had been scheduled, and another line from the family center saying her daughter had asked when she would see her mom again. Megan read it with trembling hands, not from fear, but because this hope wasn't blind hope anymore. She stepped into the hallway and saw Tristan closing the children's door, and the moment their eyes met, that was enough for both of them to understand they were standing on the same side of a choice. They didn't talk about forever. They talked about tomorrow, about the next therapy session, about Noah's school schedule, about Ivy wanting advanced art lessons, about Megan needing to prepare her paperwork. Those small things fit together into something larger than any vow. Their story didn't end with a lavish wedding or a victory speech. It ended with a house that felt less cold, and laughter that didn't sound forced anymore. What remained in this story wasn't the downfall of a bad man. It was the rising of people who'd been crushed by a dirty system and by fear. The lesson wasn't about who was stronger. It was about who dared to choose presence instead of running, who dared to apologize instead of hiding, who dared to write new rules for their own family instead of repeating the old circle. The steady presence of a father, the quiet courage of a mother who'd once lost everything, and the blunt honesty of 2 children broke the cycle of violence and silence. Maybe in real life not everyone has a mansion or power, but everyone has small choices each day. The choice to tell the truth, the choice to listen, the choice not to cause more harm. How did this story make you feel? And in your own life, what needs that kind of steady presence in order to heal? If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next stories. Hit like to support us, and share this video with anyone who needs a little hope. We'd truly love to read your honest comments, your real thoughts from deep in your heart about family, about forgiveness, and about second chances. Thank you for listening all the way to the final minutes. Wishing everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peace each day. Goodbye, and see you again in the next video.